Hello everyone. Last video, I talked about the assassin and how I'd want to rebalance it. Today, I thought I'd talk about a class that's on the other side of the balancing board. Today's subject is rebalancing the warrior. Now, in all the time I've been around the community, I've only ever heard positive things about the warrior. So I want to see what makes the warrior special and if we can or even should do anything to change it. Now, I think consistency will be important, so let's ask the same 3 questions I introduced for the assassin. First, what is the warrior's role? Why would someone want to play the warrior? Second, is this role unique? Are there other classes that do something similar? And of course, does the warrior do its role well? Does the warrior work well for beginners? What about endgame players? What about everyone in between? That's a discussion I have for today. If you have any comments, questions, or criticisms, feel free to leave them below. This is all brainstorming to help make the game more enjoyable for everyone. So, on to our first point. The warrior's role is probably a berserker that gets in close to deal massive single target damage. However, an argument could also be made that the warrior is a team support thanks to its group buff. Or it could also be seen as a tank. Or maybe it could also be seen as a rushing class. And you can probably see where we're going with this. Next, is the warrior unique? Well, the warrior shares some similarities with paladin and samurai, but I actually think ninja is the closest example. Although more frail, ninja is also a close-range DPS class, which I think is the warrior's main purpose. Still, it's a pretty unique character with everything it has going for it, and boy does it have a lot going for it. With that said, is the warrior good at what it does? Absolutely. I think warrior starts out underwhelming for beginners, but by the endgame, there's no denying its strengths. Warrior easily has the highest single target DPS in the game. What's more, it's the second bulkiest class in the game. I mean, you could argue that paladin is more tanky, but warrior can usually just leech heals off of a nearby paladin. Some of the warrior's weaknesses are its mana, wisdom, dexterity, and speed, but all of these problems are fixed by its ability. The only downsides to the warrior are its range and its single target damage, but these aren't big issues against most endgame bosses. So, do I think the warrior needs rebalanced? Yes. I think it's kind of weak for early game, but it's definitely too strong for the endgame. So, how would I rebalance warrior? To answer that, I first want to look at some other ideas I've seen thrown around. One idea thrown around is nerfing sword damage. I honestly disagree with this. I don't think directly nerfing the warrior's DPS is the way to go. I think there are better ways to go about changing the class. Also, Deca has suggested reducing the berserk and damaging bonuses. While I don't think the concept is bad, I also don't think it solves the problem. See, reducing berserk reduces the group's DPS, and that means people will want more DPS. But the problem here is that the warrior has the highest single target DPS, and that means more people will want to play warrior. And that means we didn't solve the problem. Of course, I do have some ideas that I think would work better. First, I think the warrior's ability is too flexible. It does way too much, and it's good at all of it. I think the first step is to reduce the defense of higher tiered helms. Have tier 0 start at +3, and have tier 6 end at +6. And while we're changing its defense, let's also change its vitality down to 60 or 65. It doesn't really need these anymore. This would make warrior slightly less of a tank and slightly more of a risky DPS character. I just think a max warrior should have better bulk than a samurai, but less than a paladin. Though paladin isn't the focus here. We can talk about that later. To further balance the helm, I think its buffs should have a shorter duration. This would give warrior more downtime on its ability, which gives it a reason for my next point. Boom. Wizmod. I think as a berserker, the warrior should be a big dumb brute. I say we give warrior a substantial Wizmod if it can get its wisdom above 50. This should be pretty hard though, because I think it should only have 45 max wisdom. I think it's nice how characters like the paladin and necromancer have reduced stats in dexterity and vitality. I think more characters should do that. Another more complicated change to helm would be to remove berserk completely and give it a group dex buff instead. Have this either give the group the highest buff from the highest Wizmod, or give a boost with diminishing returns. This way, more warriors would still help the group DPS, but each would help less. What's more, if the cooldown for Helm was removed, it would give players a reason to use different items as a solo player could stack dexterity on everyone for a short time if it has enough mana. Still, there's another interesting way to curb the warrior's DPS without touching its equipment or its stats. See, I've mentioned a few times that the warrior has the best single target DPS. However, Ninja's piercing shots give it an edge over the warrior if it needs to hit 2 enemies. See, it's honestly pretty surprising how few endgame dungeons have artifact phases. The tomb bosses have these, and so does O1. Now imagine if endgame bosses like the Void Entity had minions circling them at certain phases. This would encourage the use of characters with piercing shots, and would give players more reason to use the Ninja as the go-to DPS class. So, those are my suggestions. But how would these affect the balance of other classes? To start, they would be nerfs to the warrior, but they wouldn't remove the warrior's role as the best single target DPS. What's more, it would still have its tank, support, and rushing roles, but each would be reduced without harming its DPS. Now the warrior would be strong without being flawless. Now, I should mention that artifacts will nerf all non-piercing classes. However, different classes have different answers to these bosses that the warrior just doesn't have. Wizard can still partially bypass artifacts with its spell, Necromancer might actually benefit from more targets to leech, and Mystic might be able to stasis artifacts and is still a utility class even without that. Now, Rogue still has its issues, but we can discuss rebalancing that later. Also, Assassin has poisons to help damage the artifacts and the boss at the same time, and of course Trickster is still a great utility class even with this nerf. What's more, Paladin is still going to be a great support class, and of course, Knight is still a tank that can hit bosses with its shield. Overall, I think changing helmets and giving endgame bosses artifacts would go a long way to help balance out the warrior without really touching its DPS. Now, what do you guys think about these ideas though? What would you do differently? Please let me know what you think. That's all I have for now though, so thank you. Bye!